Hello everyone. Today we're going to cover chapter 2 regarding the production possibilities frontier. Within this chapter, we're going to analyze the production of goods and services with simple economic models, specifically the production possibilities frontier and its economic framework. In economics, we use economic models to help understand real-life situations, help simplify the complexities of reality, and illustrate it in a graphical illustration. When we use economic models, we help simplify economic reality in a manner that can be explained graphically, mathematically, and also theoretically when we're looking at economic analysis. It helps formulate economic policy, explain economic policy, or the potential effects of a policy. It's not meant to replicate reality. It's simply meant to help simplify and provide economic analysis or formulate some form of economic policy when we're looking at economic modeling. We also consider the ceteris paribus assumption. The ceteris paribus assumption indicates that when we do economic models, we have to hold everything else constant and help analyze the economy with one variable at a time, or simply holding everything else the same. Let's focus on one factor at a time. Ceteris paribus assumption, which is very important in economic modeling. One of the simple economic models that we use is the production possibilities frontier. And the production possibilities frontier, it illustrates the possible combination of goods and services that can be produced during a certain period of time under the conditions that we have a given state of technology and fully employed resources, or for a simple economy that produces two goods in the market, given the available resources. So we have a simple economy that can be illustrated using the production possibilities frontier economic modeling when we're looking at economic analysis. It's going to illustrate the maximum quantity of one good that can be produced in our simple economy given the production of the other good in the market. So suppose we have two main goods: capital goods like technology, computers, and consumer goods, things that are consumed by the consumer: food, roses, clothing, and so on. We can produce a maximum combination of both or a maximum quantity of each. This can be done graphically, and also we can illustrate this in an economic model that is referred to as the production possibilities frontier, or the PPF model. The PPF model is going to illustrate the graphical illustration here of our computers, which are capital goods that can be produced on the vertical axis. And on the horizontal axis, we have the consumer goods, which could be, for example, in this case, roses. We can produce up to 40 roses given our available resources, or up to 30 computers given the available resources in our simple economy. Now, any combination along the line, something like point A, which indicates 15 computers and 20 roses, is possible, and any combination other than point A is also possible: 9 computers and 28 roses. So along the line, we have things that can be produced by in our economy given the availability of resources or resource allocation. Within the inside of the curve, we may be underutilizing resources, and then we have points outside the curve which may indicate resources are not attainable. If we're operating within the inside of the model, or anything within the inside of the possibilities frontier line, we can produce. It's feasible, but it's not efficient. The production possibilities frontier illustrates important concepts of production, efficiency, opportunity cost in the production process of goods and services, and also things that cannot be achieved. So anything that's within the line, A, B, or any other point along the line, it's feasible and efficient, and it can be produced. If it's outside the line, or if it's not within the production's capabilities over a simple economy, it cannot be produced. When we're looking at the PPF model, it's a simple graphical illustration that indicates all of the possible activities of an economy. Underproduction is point C, underemployment of resources. Point A and B indicate efficiency. Point D, we don't have enough resources yet. The simple PPF model can be illustrated, in this case, in a downward sloping line, or often cases it can also be illustrated in a concave downward PPF model. Within this PPF model, we have a constant trade-off, which in this case is referred to as the opportunity cost. of production. If we produce more roses, we have to decrease the production of computers from 15 to 9 and vice versa. So we can produce more roses, but since we have a trade-off in our economy, we also face an opportunity cost. To consume and produce more roses, we have to decrease the production of computers if we're only producing those two goods. This is considered a constant cost trade-off production possibilities frontier, where we have to produce more and give up some computers, and it's at the same rate. Often cases that is not always the situation. Sometimes we have a production possibilities frontier that in the real world has a increasing trade-off. And most production possibilities frontiers, PPF models, are bowed out or concave outward, and they have increasing opportunity costs. As we produce more of a certain good, the opportunity cost or the trade-off increases significantly. So this is referred to as the law of increasing trade-offs or the law of increasing opportunity costs. As more of a good is produced, the opportunity cost of producing a good itself increases, meaning that if in the economy you have to produce more of a certain good, you have to decrease the production of other goods in order to increase the production of the good that you're looking to produce. And sometimes that trade-off can be significant or increasing. So let's take a look at the case of an increasing opportunity cost, PPF, and how the model can be illustrated. With a bowed out PPF model, we can illustrate important implications of increasing trade-offs, and also we can actually see other implications when it comes to economic growth. Consider our computer production, 30 computers and 40 roses. But in this situation, we have a concave down or a bowed out PPF model that it's non-linear. It's concave or it's bowed out. It looks like a bow. And in this case, our first production point indicates that we can produce 25 computers and 20 roses. So to produce the first 20 roses, it requires giving up some computer production because we have to reallocate or divert resources to our production of roses. So we have to cut production of computers in order to produce some roses. So we give up 5 computers. But what if we want to produce another 20 roses in this case? If we want to produce another 20 roses, the same amount as before, 20 more roses, but this time the trade-off may be even more significant. In the previous one, we had constant trade-offs. We will always give up the same amount because it was linear. In this case, since it's an increasing PPF, we can produce 20 more roses, but we now have to give up 25 computers. So the trade-offs are different along the PPF model when it's concave down or when it's a curved PPF. If it's a linear line, then the trade-off is constant. It's always the same. And sometimes life is a little more complex. Trade-offs are not always constant. They're not always linear. In this situation, we have a non-linear PPF that is bowed out, that at every stage of production, the trade-offs or the opportunity cost of production increases. So very important, two important distinctions between the linear PPF and the non-linear PPF. So when we're looking at the concept of opportunity cost, our PPF model, it could be linear, it could be concave, it can help illustrate economic growth. Again, whether it's linear or concave, the concept of economic growth can be illustrated on both PPFs. We're going to use the concave PPF, that is downward sloping, bowed out in this case, to illustrate the simple concept of economic growth. And what is economic growth? Economic growth is the growing ability of a country to increase its production levels year after year and increase the quality and standard of living of life of its citizens, or simply the ability to produce more of everything within a given economy. In this case, we have a simple economy that produces only computers and roses. And if we want to grow the productivity of computers and grow the production of roses, we have to increase the production of both. And over time, economic growth occurs in our economy. So economic growth in this case is going to shift the PPF outward because the economy is growing, it's expanding, and it's going to increase the production of computers and increase the production of roses to a new PPF or to a new level. Notice how the economy expands, it grows. And this is referred to as the expansion effect or the economic growth of an economy. The economy can produce more of everything. Previously, we were producing only 25 computers, and now 25 computers and 20 roses. Now, as the economy grows, it can produce 30 computers and 25 roses. What triggers this economic growth? Well, it's an increase in the availability of resources, an increase in technology, an increase in efficiency factors, and so on, that can expand the economy to a greater level. Economic growth takes time. It takes some time for economic growth to occur. Within the Possibilities frontier model, we can also illustrate the working conditions of the market and of the economy. It's helpful in illustrating economic concepts such as the production of goods and services and how to allocate resources, the efficiency of resources, the underemployment of resources, the economic growth an economy can experience and how it can produce more of everything, and also scarcity factors. The finiteness of resources can also be shown in graphically in the PPF model. When we don't have enough resources, we can only produce a certain amount of goods in this case, and that gives us our PPF boundaries. When resources increase in availability, we can produce more. And if resources are not available to produce a certain good, then we cannot produce more of that product. So the scarcity factor can be explained within the PPF model. So let's take a look at the 7 important components or the 7 economic concepts that the PPF Economic Framework help explain and are illustrated within the simple graphical illustration. We have the scarcity factor, the scarce resources, so we need to allocate them efficiently in the production process. The choices made within the economy to produce a combination of goods. The opportunity costs in production, meaning that if we produce more of the other good, we have to decrease the production of one, or vice versa. To produce more of the other, we have to decrease production or change production. So that's an opportunity cost in the production process. We have productive efficiency, productive inefficiency. If we're producing efficiently, then we're producing the maximum combination of goods and services given the available resources along the PPF line. Productive inefficiency is when you underproduce and you're not operating within your economics capabilities. And of course, unemployment of resources is very closely tied in with inefficiency when you underutilize resources. And our concept of economic growth, what economic growth is and how it can help an economy expand. And economic growth is experienced by most countries, although at different rates. Economic growth is a factor that it's very common in modern economies and developed countries, but not every country experiences economic growth at the same rate or at the same time in this case. It can happen with different abilities. With the PPF model, if we look at productive efficiency, what that means is, in this case, the condition in which the maximum output produced within an economy, it's produced given the available resources and the available technology. There's no missed opportunities and there's no wasted resources. You're highly efficient in the production of goods and services and meeting the needs of your economy and the needs of society. Productive inefficiency refers to the condition in which less than the maximum output is produced given the available resources and the available technology. Basically underproducing given your capabilities and given your ability within the economy. Now, how does technology help the PPF model? Technology is one of those fundamental pillars of production and economic growth. It's the body, the skills, the knowledge involved in the use of resources in the production process that help increase productivity, that help stimulate the economy. It's an advance in technology that is happening every month, every year, and every time the economy expands, there's a technology contribution. So it's commonly referred to as the growing ability to produce more of everything in the market. And in today's economy, technology is being used a lot in the production process of goods and services. So think about how technology is now shaping the way firms are producing and the way the economy is moving forward in terms of technological advantage, technological innovation, technological employment, or technological unemployment, people losing jobs to technology, or automation, or a complementary factor of both employee and technology working at its best. Technology is now one of the high fundamental pillars of production and economic growth. So, economic growth in this case. If you look at panel A, we illustrate a simple economy that focuses on a military-based economy or a civilian-based economy, where we produce goods for society, for the consumer. If we increase the economic resources, collectively speaking, for civilian goods for the public, and also for military goods for our protection of our economy, then we can increase the economy's ability to produce all goods and services, civilian and military, from the production possibilities 1 to the production possibilities 2. In this case, it's an expansion in all of the goods that are produced for military and civilian. Panel B indicates that, let's say we want to be more concerned with the civilian good availability and goods and services for our public and our society. Then we can divert or use all of the resources that are discovered or that become available to produce those goods and services. Or in this case, if the technology available is used to the production of civilian goods, then we want to produce more civilian goods rather than military goods. So the PPF model will only shift in the direction where the resources, technology, or productivity sector is being utilized to produce those goods. So it will only shift partially for the civilian goods and services. If you use technology or resources, or you discover new methods, new resources and apply it for both, then it would shift here in this case for both items. If you only apply for one, civilian goods, then it only shifts partially. Sometimes people are concerned with military, so it will shift only for military. It depends on how it's applied. Within the PPF model, we can also look and analyze the gains of trade and the role of specialization and how it contributes to output. We can use a PPF model to indicate how a country can benefit from a specialization and also from trading with another country or by an individual itself. For an individual person that can produce on its own or specialize in a skill set and then trade that skill set in the market with someone else. A specialization in trade is a key component within the PPF model, economic framework, and implication. If we apply it to a country that specializes in the production of any certain good and then trades with other countries for other goods can become better off. We can use this simple idea of a specialization in trade and reinforce it or actually show how the PPF model can help to explain why trade and specialization is crucial when it comes to mutual gains from trade and simple economies trading with one another. One of the key components of the PPF model, and that helps us explain this concept, is comparative advantage. Typically, if a country, a person, a business, an individual specializes in a good or service, is because they may have a low cost, or what is referred to as a lower opportunity cost than someone else. Comparative advantage is a situation in which someone can produce a good or service at a lower opportunity cost than anybody else can. Think about the lower opportunity costs. If you can think about producing it cheaper, producing it more effectively, producing it more economically speaking, lower in lower cost term than someone else. I know we don't often hear comparative advantage, so just think about producing it at a lower cost. but the technical meaning is the lower opportunity cost of production. And then we also have situations in which individuals, business, or countries can produce more of everything better than everybody else can with given the available resources. That is referred to as absolute advantage. Absolute advantage exists in an activity if any country, individual, person, or business can produce more of everything and sometimes more better than anybody else can, and therefore you should produce it in your business or as a person or as a country. This is very often referred to as we should produce domestic because our country can produce it better and it can produce more than anyone else can, given the available resources and the state of technology. But you will notice that by applying the comparative advantage principle in theory and in this case simple analysis, often cases, even if a country has absolute advantage or even if a person has absolute advantage, it is often comparative advantage that determines potential benefits of a specialization and trade. So not always whoever can produce more of everything should produce more of everything or everything for everybody. Let's take a look at the US, for example. Consider the production possibilities frontiers for the US. We have the United States that can produce computers and that can produce roses. The United States is one of the most developed countries in the world, and it has the ability to produce the vast majority of goods and services than anybody else can in the world. If you look at the current production, it can produce 30 computers and 40 roses. Currently, the consumer bundle that is operating and producing without trading with anybody, let's assume that the US produces everything domestically. Close the borders, we want to produce domestic. Any capital goods like computers are going to be produced in the US. Any consumer goods like roses are going to be produced in the US. And we're going to meet the needs of our citizens at 18 computers and at 16 roses. That is our current bundle. So without trade, without anybody else, America is the only country that can produce everything domestically. We have all of the resources produced in the US. We need to calculate the opportunity cost of production for the analysis that we're going to do. So for now, let's assume the US has the ability to produce domestic and not trade with anybody else. Just produce domestic. And we're going to compare it to a different country. So right now we're going to analyze the opportunity cost of production when it comes to roses and computers because we want to know how much or what's the cost in the US itself. Since it's producing domestically, let's look at the opportunity cost. Remember, the US can produce 30 computers and the US can produce 40 roses and is currently at a bundle of 18 computers and 16 roses. This is the bundle that the US is currently operating right now. Combination of both. Because it's meeting the needs of its consumers that want computers and it's meeting the needs of its consumers that want roses. So this is our bundle. Let's analyze the costs, the opportunity cost of production within the US for roses and the opportunity cost of production for the US for computers. I have to do those scenarios. So let's take a look at the analysis. The opportunity cost of production within the US is if the US produces roses, all of the roses, then it can produce up to 40 roses and it would have to sacrifice the computer production, which is 30. But it's currently operating at a bundle of 16 roses and 18 computers. Let's take a look. Let's take a look at the US. The US is operating at 16 roses and 18 computers. So that means that to produce 16 roses, they had to increase the production, so 16 minus 0, and it's producing 18 computers. So they had to cut the production of computers down from 30 to 18 to produce those 16 roses. So here it is. It's producing 16 roses. The computers it can produce is producing at 18 minus the 30 that it could produce. So it's giving up, or the trade-off here is you're decreasing your production of computers by 12. So that's what the negative sign means. You decrease your production of computers by 12 to produce 16 roses. If you simplify this, it's negative 3/4. For every one rose produced, the US decreases production of computers by 3/4, which is what this negative sign means. What about if the US produces computers? If the US produces computers, well, it's operating at a situation in which it's operating at 18 computers, and it's given up, it could produce 30, so it's 18 minus 30, that's negative 12. And the current situation of roses, you have to inverse this case. You have to flip them. If you're looking for computers, this is the US computer production. You produce computers, what's the bundle right now? It's 18 computers minus the original 30 that you could produce. What is the bundle right now? It's 16 roses minus 0 because you're increasing the pressure of giving up some roses. So that's 16 over 12, but that's 4 divided by 3 when you simplify it, or 1 1/3. What this means is that the US, for every one computer produced in the US, if you produce one computer in the US, you'll give up 1/3, 1 1/3 of rose cultivation, if you're looking at the opportunity cost calculation for the US, meaning the trade-off. If you produce 18 computers, you have to subtract it from the 30 because that's how much you were producing, or just 18 by itself. And if you produce 16 roses, you have to decrease it from the original 0 rose production. So 16 over negative 12 divided by, it's equivalent to negative 1 1/3. So this is the opportunity cost for the US. 3/4 for roses and 1 1/3 for computers. Let's take a look if we have Colombia, for example. That also is part of the Western Hemisphere. It has a different economic structure of the US. Colombia can produce computers, and Colombia can produce roses. One of the most beautiful roses come from Colombia. And we have a situation where Colombia can produce 10 computers, and Colombia can produce 30 roses. And currently, without being trading with anybody else in the world, it's producing 8 computers on its own and 6 roses on its own. So without trade, without anybody else, Colombia is producing 8 computers and 6 roses. This is referred to as self-sufficiency and self-production. Well, that's what it can produce. And if you notice, if you produce 10 computers, then you have to decrease the production of roses. And if you want to create a combination here, to produce 8 computers, you give up 2. So to produce, if you want to have a combination, which means you have to give up 2 computers, you decline it from 10 to 8, you give up 2 to produce 6 roses. And if you produce another 6 roses, then you probably have to give up another 2 computers. So that will be 12 roses and 6 computers, and so on. So let's look at the opportunity cost of Colombia productivity. Colombia opportunity cost. If Colombia produces roses, here, Colombia produces roses, how many is it producing? It's producing 6. So that's x2, 6 roses, minus x1, which is 0 in this case. And it has to give up some computers. The computers that are given up in this situation are 8 you produce 8 computers minus 10, which were the maximum capability. So you give up negative 2, you give up 2 computers. You decrease your production of computers by 2, negative 2, to produce 6 roses, or in this case is negative 1/3. It's the absolute value. Negative 1/3 or 1/3. For every 1 rose produced, Colombia gives up 1/3 of the computer. That's what it means. For every 1 rose produced, Colombia gives up 1/3 of a computer because you're diverting resources to produce roses. What about if Colombia produces computers? Well, if Colombia produces computers, well, you have to now inverse it. You inverse the analysis. Well, you're producing 8 computers minus 10, which is the original maximum point. Again, it's the maximum point. 8 computers minus 10. That gives you negative 2. This should be negative 2. Negative 2, if you take the absolute value, will be positive. And then you have roses, that you produce 6 roses minus 0. So you have 6 roses divided by negative 2. It's equivalent to negative 3 in absolute value. It gives you 3. So that's, again, we're doing the absolute value, so I just left it at 3. the Colombian computer opportunity cost is that for every 3 computers produced, for every 1 computer produced, Colombia gives up 3 roses. So this is what I mean. If you produce 1 computer, your production of roses declines by 3. Another computer, your production of roses declines by 3. So it simply is 10 over 10. So it's, in this case, inverse. It is 30 divided by 10 is 3. If you produce 10 computers, you give up 30 roses, or if you simplify it, it's 3. For every 1 computer produced, you give up 3 roses, and you simplify it. If you're doing the total production, for every 10 computers produced, you have to give up 30 roses. So if you produce 10 computers, you give up 30 roses. 30 divided by 10 is 3. For 1 computer produced, you give up 3 roses. So let's compare them side by side. If you look at the US in this case, without trade, is producing 18 computers and 16 roses. Colombia, without trade, it's producing 8 computers and 6 roses. And let's bring the analysis here. Which country here has an absolute advantage in producing both roses and computers? The US or Colombia? The US, by far, if you look at the image, just by looking at the image without even doing a calculation, you can see that the US has an absolute capability or an absolute advantage in producing computers and roses. It can produce 30 computers versus Colombia's 10. And it can produce 40 roses versus Colombia's 10 units. So in this case, the US has an absolute advantage in producing more of everything than Colombia. However, a lot of people can argue that the US should produce computers and roses because it can produce more of everything. That's not the main analysis here. It's not a complete picture. If you look at Colombia, it can produce 10 computers, which is relatively small, and 30 roses. We can still see that the country can benefit with the US, both of them combined, can benefit by specializing in which they have the lowest opportunity cost in production. Comparative advantage. Comparative advantage determines gains from trade. Comparative advantage determines gains from trade and if countries can specialize and trade with each other. Not absolute advantage. A lot of people confuse those two. Simply because the US has an absolute power and an absolute advantage, it doesn't necessarily mean that the US should produce everything, computers and roses. It does. It has an absolute advantage here. Absolute advantage in computers and absolute advantage in roses. But the theory of comparative advantage is letting us know that, hold on a second, if Colombia has a low opportunity cost in the production of one of the goods, let Colombia produce that product and specialize in the production of that good and then trade with the US for the other good. So let's take a look at the opportunity cost calculation. So the US has a lower opportunity cost in computer production at 1 1/3. We figured out that the US had the lowest opportunity cost in the computer production. Therefore, it has a comparative advantage in the production of computers. It can produce computers at a lower cost. We calculated the opportunity cost of the US being at 1 1/3. Colombia has a lower opportunity cost in the production of roses at 1/3. Colombia can produce roses at a lower opportunity cost at 1/3 for every 1 computer produced. Colombia has a 1/3 of a cost. So therefore, in this case, Colombia has the lowest opportunity in the production of roses. Therefore, it has a comparative advantage in the production of roses itself. So, as a remember, whichever country, whether it's a country, individual, business, party, or person, has the lower opportunity cost in the production of any good, that party will specialize in the production of that good or service in which it has the lowest opportunity cost, or technically speaking, a comparative advantage. The US has an absolute advantage versus Colombia, but we have seen That is comparative advantage, those with the lower opportunity cost. There's a slight distinction. There's a slight distinction between those two. The US will specialize in which it has the lowest opportunity cost. So the US specializes in computer production because it can produce it at a lower cost. So the US will specialize in computer production, and after they go into an open economy structure with Colombia, they can engage in a trading system, in multilateral trade that they can agree on, and then trade with each other. They specialize in computers, and Colombia can specialize in rose production. Colombia can produce roses, and now with the trade agreement with the US as a trading partner, Colombia can be open to trade roses to the US in exchange for computers, in this case. Now, the terms of trade can actually differ depending on each country. But for the most part, the US is going to trade anything above, it's going to trade what is more beneficial to them according to their cost analysis. It's going to want to keep more computers than it can produce by itself, which is 18. So it's going to keep 20 computers with trade, and the remaining 10 computers are going to be traded to Colombia in exchange for roses. The US is going to want to have more roses than what it can produce on its own, which is 16. So the US is going to, in this case, take 20 roses from Colombia in trade, and Colombia is going to want to keep more roses than it can consume on its own. So they're going to want to keep more than 6, which in this case is at 10. So let's take a look how this is going to look. The US produces 30 computers, full specialization. Colombia specializes in trade with roses and no computers. Engaged in trade, the US keeps 20 computers, trades the remaining 10 out of the 30 to Colombia, and Colombia in this case produces 30 roses, keeps 10 out of those 30 roses for itself, and trades the remaining 20 to the US. When you open an economy for trade and a specialization, the US with trade consumes 20 computers, which is more than 18, and 20 roses, which is more than 16, what they were producing on their own. And Colombia with trade now receives 10 computers from the US and keeps 10 roses from its own production, 10 which is more than 8, and 10 which is more than 6. Together with the specialization and trade and lower opportunity costs, they are consuming more together by working together, by specializing, by opening the borders to international trade than if they were at self-sufficiency. This is gains from trade accrue to both countries when it's mutually beneficial. You can argue that they can stay in self-sufficiency and absolute ability, but with both agreements, with comparative advantage, both countries are better off, and the consumers and the citizens are better off if they have access to more goods. So it is comparative advantage that determines gains from trade. Not always the bigger fish gets to do and produce everything or consume everything. You can often benefit from a deal with a different country. Now, Colombia versus US. Colombia, as mentioned, has a comparative advantage in rose production. They can produce it at a lower opportunity cost. We can do this mathematically. You can actually see the numbers are a little bit lower, and therefore it should specialize in the production of roses. And the United States has a comparative disadvantage in rose production because Colombia can produce it cheaper and lower cost. Therefore, the US should consider specializing in computer production because it is comparative advantage that determines the specialization, not absolute. Remember that. When we're looking at the US and Colombia are both better off when they each specialize together and produce the product in which they have the lower cost and which they're good at it and producing at a lower cost, and then trade with each other for mutual gains. Sometimes countries go back and forth in terms of trade. What are they going to trade or what are the terms of trade? But as long as it's mutual, there's gains for both. Colombia specializes in roses because it has lower costs. And the US specializes in computer making because it may have the better infrastructure, the better technology, and also because it has the lower cost according to our theoretical model, or the opportunity cost of computer production is lower for the US. Now, thank you everyone for our brief analysis and our brief discussion on the production possibilities frontier in terms of simple economic analysis, opportunity cost calculation. Make sure to practice the opportunity cost calculation because that's often the most probably difficult part in calculating opportunity costs and how it relates to the graphical illustration. Have a good day. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.